For this morning, I kind of want to pick up where we were last week, but in a bit of a different way. Last week, I referenced just really quickly the story that we're told in John chapter 4 through the eyes of Jesus' friend John, and what Jesus experienced one day in a chance meeting with an unsuspecting woman beside an ancient well in central Israel, and just the profound story that this is and how it can really shape us and our thinking. So I want to go back to that story and tell you that I think maybe more than any other story, it clearly and compellingly explains one of our church's deepest convictions. It's a conviction that we were founded with and birthed with. It's in our DNA. It's undeniable. In fact, I would say that this conviction is so strong and permeates through us so definitively that if it isn't or doesn't become part of your DNA, you're going to feel uncomfortable being part of Copper Hills for any length of time. It's so core to us. And this is what this conviction is. It's simply this, that the good news of Jesus, his death, his resurrection, are not the minimum doctrines you need to embrace in order to get to heaven when you die, but that Jesus changes our lives now, in this moment where we are when we place our trust in him. He changes every part of our lives from the top to the bottom, from the inside out, progressively over the time that we're with him. And if our friendship with him is more than a vehicle for us to get to heaven, which that is part of the story, but it is not the whole story, and it's kind of broken if that's the part that we have rested in. But should we think of him as the life giver today and build a friendship, an increasingly growing, loving friendship with him, an interesting thing happens to us, and this is our conviction, that we actually begin to think more and more like him intuitively and naturally, and we actually get to a place where we're mistaken for him increasingly. That people somehow associate us with him and him with us, not because we've tried, but because we've simply given ourselves to a friendship with him. We've become his student, his follower, his apprentice. We learn from him how he thinks by being with him. And lo and behold, it starts to take over in our thinking, and then our behavior follows. And wouldn't you know it, we look like him, we function like him because we think like him. And then even beyond that, as people who don't know him, who don't trust him, who are cynics, who are skeptics and doubters, look at us as they did Jesus and they go, there must be something here because that's a really attractive life. And they actually become interested explorers, journey with us, and we have the opportunity to point them to the one who made us who we are, changed our thinking, and they're interested enough to explore it themselves. It's amazing how it happens. And that's a core conviction of ours. And if that isn't your core conviction, would you think about how this really might be a biblical core conviction? It's been part of us for 20 years as a church. That's how long we've been around. And it's this story from John chapter 4 that just reflects the conviction that we have. So I want to read parts of it with you this morning, but I want to encourage you to take it with you this week. It's John chapter 4. There's like 40 some verses. You can read it in about 7 minutes. And I would encourage you every week, every day this week, set aside some time in a quiet place, if you can find one, and read it. Read it slowly. Read it thoughtfully. Don't read it to get through it. If you get hijacked along the way and you can't get all the way through it because something strikes you in it, don't go with that. Read it as a student, as a learner. Put yourself in the story. Which character might you be in this story? How does it relate to you? How does it connect to you? Know something? Can I tell you something? God's Spirit wrote the scripture through human beings. Right? That's good. Do you think there's a chance that he's still on the job, that he could take the things that he inspired some human to write and actually interpret it for you as an individual person? I think he could. And I think he wants to do that. So give that a shot this week. Let's see what God does in your soul, in your heart. So now to the story, right? Get to it. All right. So John chapter 4, this is how verse 3 starts. It says, Jesus left Judea, southern part of Israel, and returned to Galilee, kind of his northern headquarters. He had to go through Samaria, central Israel, on the way. Eventually, he came to the Samaritan village of Sychar, near the field that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Now, Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired from the long walk, sat wearily beside the well about noontime. Soon, a Samaritan woman came to draw water. Here's what's happening. The truth of the matter is, as much as John says Jesus must go through Samaria to the north, that's not actually true. It's not that John is not telling the truth. It's just that we interpret that and go, well, that was the only route. No, it wasn't. There were at least two other reasonable routes that Jesus could take. He could have gone over to the coast, to the Mediterranean Sea, and had a nice kind of beach vacation walk up the coast and then gone back in over to Galilee. He could have gone up the Jordan River Valley, which was the most common. It was almost like a freeway up to the northern part. But no, John records he must go through Samaria. So what? Well, you didn't want to go through Samaria. Not if you were a Jewish person. You didn't want to travel that route because that was not friendly territory. You could almost every morning get a text from the Department of Don't Travel Here and get a travel warning about going through Samaria. You're in trouble. You're on your own. We're not going to come and rescue if you go through there. It's not a territory you want to travel through because Samaritans didn't like Jews and Jews didn't like Samaritans. And there's a long history why that, in fact, is the case. You just wanted to avoid it. So the must can't be that it was the best route, the shortest route to go. There's another must. And this is what we learn from Jesus over and over again. His musts always relate to people. It's about somebody. It's about a town. It's about a person. It's about a blind person. It's about somebody he has to go see. It's people. It's communities. It's towns and villages that he cares about. People. That's the must. So evidently, John realizes either at the point or afterwards that, oh, I get it, how the story unfolds. Something was going on that Jesus had to go there at that time. He had to. Evidently, Jesus must have sensed a need to go there, right? Where did that come from? Had he maybe visited this town before? Had he scouted it out? Maybe someone told him a story about this woman who every noonday, because that's not when you go for water, it goes for water at this ancient well that your ancestors built, Jesus. Maybe Jesus and his dad delivered some furniture up there one day from their carpenter shop. And he ran into the people of that town. And we just don't know how exactly he knew about this, if in fact he knew about it. So my guess is this doesn't say it, right? This is my guess. That's just how Jesus lived his life. I think every day, this kind of experience was part of Jesus' experience. Now, this is profound, and John records it, but my guess is every day, Jesus had the eyes as he walked around in his world where people mattered, and he noticed people. He just noticed them. And then when he noticed them, he was curious enough to take interest in them. And so he would do that. I'll bet he would go to restaurants, sit down, pull out the menu. The hostess would come over, and I'll bet he would engage her in a conversation. I'll bet he found out what her name was or his name was. Went to the bank to do some banking, and he talked to the teller and found out what the teller's name was. I'll bet that's just how he lived his life. He did. He walks into Jericho one day, and there's a blind guy, and everybody else just ignore him. Jesus goes, no. Bartimaeus, I don't know about you, man. How did he know? Well, he took notice and he took interest. These are the eyes that Jesus has to his world. He notices people and he takes interest in them. Why does he do that? Well, he wants to get them on his team, right? He wants to convince them. He wants to point out, well, you're kind of wrong in that area, and your morality is like, that really sucks what you do. Like, you can't do that. You can't keep doing it. Like, you got to get on my team here. You're thinking the wrong way. Your theology is mixed up. No, that's not actually what he wants. That's kind of the faith community that I grew up in. I'm so grateful for my upbringing. I learned the Bible. I memorized chunks of the Bible, and I'm grateful. It'll still come to my mind. I'm thankful for the foundation of knowing that Jesus died for me and my sins are forgiven. Really grateful for that. But I just never heard that I could do life with him. I didn't know that. And so when I was growing up, I was taught you have to get the message out that Jesus died for people and that they can go to heaven if they'll put their trust in him and let him pardon them of their sins. And that's truthful. And we had this thing that was called evangelism. And that's what we did. And one aspect of it was I was told I needed to witness. I needed to witness for Jesus. Well, what that evidently involved, and this is all I was told about it, was that involved engaging people in conversations with my friends about spiritual matters. But mostly the launching point for those conversations had something to do with moral character or moral behavior, primarily theirs, that it was out of line. And I was there to kind of correct it in Jesus' name. That's what it was. And then secondly, you got to come with me to church, because evidently there are leaders, adults who are a little more sophisticated, more knowledgeable than me. And what they'll do is they'll convince you even further. And then at some point, they're going to invite you to, in front of all of our friends, walk to the front, kneel down and say this prayer. And you get to go to heaven. Like, you ought to do that. And so I would bring friends from time to time, and I would walk away going, whoa, I think they got coerced. I think that didn't really change something in their world. And now it does, but this was my experience, right? I got the sense that if my friends didn't walk to the front and didn't say yes to this, that there was a tone in the way it was said that they really deserved to go to hell. They deserved it because they had their chance and they didn't get it. And so that would just be the way that would end. And I didn't want to bring my friends to that. And so I didn't bring my friends to that because it was unattractive to me too. It was scary to me. Another important witnessing tool that I was given was 4x3 booklets called tracts. You ever had those? Been given those? Yeah. The grand idea was that you would give these to people, even strangers, and they would read them and they would be convicted of their sin and they would say yes to Jesus. And some people have actually experienced that. They have. I was also trained to draw out and recite the 4 spiritual laws. But I often botched it up. And I would get law 2 and 3 mixed up. And I would kind of fumble my way through to the end of it. And I would walk away so humiliated and ashamed, embarrassed that I just wrecked someone's eternity because I got law 2 and 3 mixed up. Like the mind of a young man, right? And I would take that into my adult years before I realized the very thing that I was wanting my friends to respond to, I wouldn't respond to myself. It was intimidating. It created fear and angst. And it wasn't actually in a community where maybe anybody really knew the reason I'm asking you this is because I desperately love you. And I've noticed you. And I'm interested in your life. And I think it's something you might want to consider. It wasn't presented that way. And so I thought, well, if I wouldn't respond to that, why would my friends respond to that? And then I look at Jesus, and I just don't see that model in him. What I see in him was one who's tender and kind and compassionate and loving, and he loves people, whether they're ever going to believe he's the Messiah or not. He loves them. And part of what he does over and over again is he takes notice of people, all kinds of people. And then he takes interest in them and finds out who they are and what they are about. And that's what Jesus does with this woman. He simply noticed her. And then he took interest in her. In fact, he did something he shouldn't have done. But the level of interest that grew in his heart for this woman in a short period of time caused him to break the social norms and acceptable behavior of what you should do. This is what he does. And it doesn't look like much to start with, but the latter part of verse 7 says, he meets her and then he turns to her and Jesus said to her, please give me a drink. He was alone at the time because his disciples had gone into the village to buy some food. The woman was surprised, of course she was, for Jews refused to have anything to do with Samaritans. She said to Jesus, you are a Jew and I am a Samaritan and I am a woman. You are asking me for a drink? Well, we learned very quickly that this woman was not only marginalized socially, but she was a social outcast. She didn't fit the model that was acceptable for a couple of reasons. One, she was a woman in a paternalistic, male-dominated society. It just was uncool, unsophisticated, unacceptable for a man to talk to a woman who wasn't his wife in a public setting. It just didn't happen. But evidently, Jesus didn't read that part of the book. He doesn't know that. No, he knows that. It just doesn't matter more to him than she does, because he's noticed her, he's taking interest in her. So she's like the wrong gender to do this. There's a religious, ethnic barrier here. She's a Samaritan. He's a Jew. And this reaches back 800 years, where a group of Jewish people living in the northern part of Israel were captured and taken off to a foreign land where they were taught the pagan gods of that particular society, while other people from those foreign lands were brought to Israel, and they all kind of intermarried and whatnot. And then over some time, they find their way back to this part of Israel. And now you've got impure Jewish bloodlines, which really matter. They're not like pure Jewish people. Plus, they've picked up some of the pagan practices of some of the gods that were around them and the nations there. And so now, if you're a pure Jew, these guys have sold the farm. They're not part of us anymore. They're kind of half of us. And if you're not all of us, you're not at all. And so this is how they saw each other and thought about it. And then about 500 years earlier, this group of kind of not Jews, Jewish people, they decide to build their own temple. No, Jerusalem was the place you were supposed to worship God. That's it. But they were so confused and frustrated with the Jewish people that they decided to build their own temple, which, by the way, the ruins of it are just at the top of the mountain at the base where this well is. Jesus and her could have looked up at it, and that's where it would have been. And so she is not the religion that's appropriate, not the ethnicity that's appropriate, the gender that's inappropriate. She is a moral outcast as well. We're going to find out, and we already know it if you know the story, that she struggled with something in her life. She struggled with relationship with men. Someplace along the way, we don't know the story, but she possibly married the guy of her dreams as a young lady. And that just didn't work out really well. And maybe she never really healed up from that. Maybe it was abusive. We don't know what the story is. But she tried 4 more times to get it right, and it just didn't get right. And now it's almost like she said, I'm not doing marriage again, I'm just going to live with the guy. And that was totally offensive in that culture. You see, she was that lady, that girl, that woman in town. And evidently, once again, Jesus didn't read that part of the book. You don't hang out with people like that. You don't. Except Jesus does, and he does it consistently, and he does it regularly, not just here, but here he does. He says, I don't start with figuring out whether you're the right religion, the right ethnicity, the right gender, the right morality. I don't do that. What I see is you. I noticed you. And now that I've noticed you, I want to take interest in you because you're interesting to me. I want to find out about you. I want to know who you are and what makes you tick. Jesus crashes through all of those barriers, because that's the power and profound nature. When you start to see the world through Jesus' eyes, you notice people, and they matter. And then you start taking interest, and they matter more. And then you involve yourself in their world. 25 years ago, in another era of my life, in another city, in another church, I had just left the business world and was figuring out what it meant to be a pastor in a church. And Jesus really gripped my heart with a love for the community around our church, part of a church that had been built for the members of the church, and we kind of did our own thing for ourselves and built a building around ourselves, and we just were us. And if you wanted to be part of us, you were welcome, but we were us. And I had an experience with Jesus along the way that opened my eyes to what could happen if the love of Christ invaded a community of people. And so for a couple of years, we had tried all kinds of things just to love our community, to selflessly care for them, to meet the needs that we were aware that were there. And slowly the community's view of us began to change. Word got out that we loved people of all shapes and sizes. You could, if you didn't share our faith, you could come and be part of us. We wouldn't compromise our faith, but we Our faith was birthed in love and embedded with that. And you didn't have to believe what we believe to come and be part of our group. And it was just a wonderful season of time as our church view changed a little bit. One day, a neighbor walked into our offices and he asked for a few minutes of my time. And I was eager to talk with him. I had never met him before. So we sat down and I asked him a little bit of his story. He told me that in recent years, he and his wife and 2 children had immigrated from a Middle Eastern country, that he was of a Muslim faith, and that he was trying to find a way to integrate into the community and build friendships and just be part of the community. And he had heard that we were a Christian church, but not like all Christian churches, in that maybe he, even though he didn't share our faith, could be welcomed and could find a place that he could be part of what we were doing. And I was really moved by that he would think of us in that kind of way. I recall thinking as he sat and he told me a little bit of his story, these thoughts went through my mind. Here is a man from another faith coming to find out about Jesus, and I'm going to tell him about Jesus. And so for the next 20 minutes, I gave him everything I had on Jesus. Everything. Why Jesus was the way, why he was the truth, why he was life. And it was good. It was really, in fact, I decided I wanted to be a Christian all over again. It was so good, right? And he remained silent, taking in everything I said, not responding in any way. So at the end of 20 minutes of my lecture and my direction, it was kind of time to close the deal, I thought. And so, what do you think? And I was sure he was going to fall on his knees and give his life to Jesus and all that stuff. Instead, he looked at me and he said, I'm very disappointed with you, Mr. Pastor. That's what he called me, Mr. Pastor. I came here to find out if you really do love people of other faiths. Instead, I see you want to convince me to become a Christian. I didn't come here to hear how much you know. I came here to find out if you really love people. And I don't care how much you know, till I know that you care and you love me. He got up from his chair and he walked out. Even as I wrote that and recalled that, the regret that I felt at that moment came all flooding back to my heart and my mind again. Because you see, I wanted to do something to him. I wanted to convince him that his faith was wrong and mine was right. I wanted to intellectually assent that, yeah, I got it wrong, and Jesus is the way, he is the truth, and the life. But what he wanted to know was whether this is a place of love, first of all. I went looking for him because it bothered me so much that I had missed on this one. Now, God can take care of him. I don't carry that weight. It's not that. It's just what was going on in my heart at that moment. In that I wasn't noticing him. I wasn't interested in him. I was interested in convincing him of something. But I never found him. I couldn't locate him. And honestly, as I tell you that this morning, I regret, again, that that's how that turned out. So Jesus meets this woman. He knows about her. What does he start with? Does he start with a tract? Does he kind of draw the 4 spiritual laws out in the sand? Does he come up with his best argument? He's good at this stuff, you know that. He knows. He'll talk circles around you. He's got the insight on theology. You know that, right? He could come up with a pretty convincing argument. Does he redirect her and go, 5 dudes, 5 men? Really? You could have done something different. Is that what he does? No. Why not? Because he noticed her. He saw her. He didn't just run by. He didn't drive into his neighborhood and see the neighbor and go, hey, how are you? And drive on and never really have a conversation. He didn't do yoga next to someone for 6 weeks and not know the name of the person from doing yoga with. He noticed them. He didn't sit in a classroom for half a semester and not know the name of the person who sits beside him, because he noticed people, because people mattered. And then when he would notice them, he would take interest and he would find out about them and he would be interested in what they're doing. And this is exactly what he does with her. You see, he's got something for her. He's not trying to do something to her. He's not trying to convince her of something. He has a gift for her. That's what he says in verse 10. This is what he says. Jesus replied to her, "If you only knew the gift God has for you and who you're speaking to, you would ask me, and I would give you living water." That's what I would do. I would satisfy your soul. That thing that you've been looking for in those guys, you'll never find it there. It's found in me. And I've got a gift for you, and that is your soul is utterly, absolutely satisfied. You don't have to look. You can end your search today for what you're searching for. You see, she's going to go on from here, and she's going to talk about some other things that she would rather talk about than like the husband problem that she has. She deflects it. She talks about, well, there's a right place to worship, and there's a right place for religious ceremony, and there's a right place for getting to know God. And she goes through this whole list of things, right? And Jesus just goes with her because all the time he's thinking, I got a gift. And the gift you're looking for is going to be the fulfillment of all those other things that you're talking about right now. And I got a gift, and I'll wait you out on this thing because I've noticed you and I'm interested in you, and I'm going to give you a gift. I'm going to satisfy your soul so that that thirst that you have that caused you to look for it in men, in sex, in money, in religious affiliation, all that stuff's all going to be satisfied because I'm going to fill your thirst with living water, a spring inside of you. That's what I'm going to do. It's a gift that I have for you. We have a 3-year-old grandson. His name is Micah. And he's a bright little boy. And just before Christmas, Grandpa and Micah were messing around, doing a few things, working on a few things. And we had been in our extra garage where we store a bunch of stuff. And I had forgotten that there was a bright colored bag with Christmas gifts in it. Well, what draws the attention of a 3-year-old little boy? A bright colored bag with gifts in it, right? So before I know it, he's over there and he's peeling back. He's looking inside. So, oh, Micah, whoa, buddy. Whoa. Like, there's a gift in there for you, but you can't have it right now. You need to wait. Which, by the way, is a concept that 3-year-olds get right away. Like, they just get it. You know, it's like you're figuring out how to turn gravity off, right? It just comes together for you. No, it doesn't for him, right? And he keeps looking at this, and so I said, Micah, I go over here. I get a cloth and I drape this thing with this cloth to cover it up to take the temptation away, right? But he keeps looking over it, and we go back inside. We do a few things, back and forth, in and out, and then all of a sudden, Micah's gone. Now I'm responsible for him. His parents are expecting that Grandpa's kind of got his hand on this thing, right? So I go looking for Micah. I go out to the garage, and there he is. And he knows he's not supposed to be in there, but he's kind of lifted this up, and he's looking inside because why? There's a gift inside of there for him. Waiting is not an option. It's like surprise at Christmas. Who cares? I want it now because that's a gift. That's the nature of a gift, isn't it? Right? That's what Jesus is offering this woman. He has something that she longs for. She wants so badly, doesn't know that she wants it, can't understand it, but he's got this gift for her, and he can't wait to give it to her. He wants her to reach out and take it. That's what he's trying to do. He has noticed her, he has taken interest in her, and he knows what he has to offer her. It's not corrective behavior. It's not a in-depth theological class. It's none of that stuff. It's the gift of himself. If you knew who was with you, I know the gift I want to give you. You know something? In God's brilliant plan, he has said to us, you want to participate with me in this world? Then you be givers of the gift. That's what you do. That's what you do with the people around you. But I know this about you. It's so precious. You aren't just going to give it to anybody. But you won't be able to stop yourself from giving it to people if you'll notice who's around you and you'll take interest in them. The most natural thing you want to do with people you love is to give them gifts. You and I are gift givers for Jesus. This is what he's invited us in to do. You hear it here often, and I'm sorry. No, I'm not sorry if it annoys you. Deal with it. You do not live where you live, work where you work, play where you play, go to school where you go to school, because the house was a great deal in the neighborhood that's ideally suited for you. The school is a place where you can get a degree that's perfectly suited to a great job coming out of it. You don't work where you work because the job suits you and fits your needs and provides financially for you. You don't play and recreate because you need to do yoga. You are placed there by Jesus Christ to be a gift giver of himself. But if you will not notice the people he puts you around, you will never take interest in them. And it could just be you're the vehicle that Jesus wants to give this gift through. Notice. He's put you around people. And the great privilege we have is to live naturally, wholesomely with him, growing in him, thinking more and more like him, and then being a gift giver to people. Do you know the names of your neighbors? Do you know when their birthdays are? Do you know whether they're vegan or vegetarian? Do you know why they drive the car they drive? Do you know where they work? Do you know what their job involves? Do you know what they do Monday to Friday? They travel a lot. Do you know where they travel? Do you know what's going on do you know what their hobbies are? Do you know what their interests are? Do you know what sports they play? The person at school with you that you sit beside like day after day, what are their interests? What are their names? When are their birthdays? What matters to them? These are all things, regardless of personality type. Introvert on the far scale over here. But Jesus doesn't say you go ahead and give the gift if you're an extrovert and you love being with people all the time. No, it's all of ours to give in the sphere he puts us for his sake and for theirs. Now, is this an awesome thing or what? Like in the truest sense of that word, we get to participate in this. And so this is what I want to draw our attention back to again. Why would we expand our facility? Why would we come back to what it is that we want to do? It's because of this vision of influencing people. This woman, she has this encounter with Jesus, and we don't even know exactly what she's thinking at the end. All we know is that bad timing once again. The disciples come back with the food, and she's kind of left there standing, thinking about this whole thing, and suddenly she runs away. Did she give up on the offer? Did it not make sense to her? Was she throwing in the towel? No. Something must have dawned on her of what she was being given. And she runs back to town and she tells a bunch of other people about it, and they come out because they can't believe what she's telling them. And it says Jesus hung around there for a couple of days, and at the end of it, a bunch of people said, we believe because of what she said, but now we've experienced it ourselves. Do you think a community and a city, do you think that if the love of Jesus through our group in here was to spread out into our place of influence, wherever it would be, do you think it would make a difference? Do you think it could actually change people's lives? Do you think it could give them hope and restore broken relationships and give a meaning, purpose to this life, not just waiting for the next one? This is what is ours to offer to people in Jesus' name. So, we're going to pray, and then I'm going to invite you to go to 3 piles of rocks. There's one here to the east of the building, one directly south as you come out of the entrance, and one back here. Those are all the 3 areas where we're planning on building structures for the fame of Jesus' name. There's a pile of rocks and a steel cage around those rocks, and there will be somebody there to meet you with a ribbon, piece of ribbon like this, and a marker. I want to encourage you, ask you, whether you between now and getting to that pile of rocks would think of somebody that you might not have noticed. And you would notice them. And you would put their name on here, or maybe many names. It's somebody come to me after the first service and said, I'm coaching a boys baseball team, and there are 11 boys on my team, and I haven't met them all. They've been assigned to me. But I want you to know I'm coming back with 11 ribbons. I'm going to pray for those 11 boys, and I'm going to notice them. I'm going to take interest in them. I'm going to watch what Jesus does with this gift through me. This is what it is. So you can take as many ribbons as you want, write the names, and then periodically come back to those places where you've tied the ribbon and pray. Pray again. Pray for those names. Pray for yourself, that you would have the courage, because it takes a little bit of courage to take interest. You don't know where that's going to go, right? But would you do that? Could we do that together as a whole church? Like, do that for these next months? It's going to make sense then why we would build a building and spend money on stuff. That's why we would do it. For the sake of people. For the sake of our Savior. All right, would you stand with me? Now, Jesus, giver of the best gift humans have ever had, which is your own life. You took notice of us. Every one of us in this room have been noticed by you. You know our name. You know our interests. You know our birthdays, because that was a great celebration for you. You know our anniversaries. You know our significant days. You know the joys that have come into our lives. You know the trials that we've gone through, the crises we've faced or we're facing right now. You just know all about us because you've taken interest in us. So much interest, in fact, that once you got to know us, you thought our life was worth more than your own. And again, you've come to us with this gift and said, would you tell others they can have it? Can you tell others that I'm interested in them? Jesus, we want you to do that through us. We just believe you can change our workplaces, our neighborhoods, our schools, places where we recreate. You can change a city. We still believe that. And so would you do that through us for the fame of your great name? And now these names we write on these ribbons, you know them already too. And pray that you would draw them to yourself so they could have this wonderful gift themselves. And this we do, Jesus, for your fame and in your name. Amen.